The moment my daughter-in-law called my car our family vehicle, I realized I had made a terrible mistake letting them get too comfortable in my home. I still remember the exact sound my slippers made against the hardwood floor that Sunday morning. Soft, slow, familiar. It was barely 7:15 a.m., and the sunlight coming through my kitchen windows painted long golden lines across the marble countertops I had spent 20 years paying off after my husband passed away. Sunday mornings were sacred to me. Coffee first, church second, silence always. I shuffled toward the garage door with my mug warming both hands, expecting to see my pearl-white Lincoln Navigator exactly where I had parked it the night before. Instead, I saw emptiness. An empty space where my SUV should have been. For a few seconds, my brain simply refused to process it. I stood there staring into the spotless garage, still wearing my pale blue robe, my reading glasses sliding down my nose, wondering if maybe I had forgotten where I parked. Which was ridiculous because I lived alone. There was only one spot. Then I noticed the text message. Vanessa. Of course. Borrowed the Lincoln for the day. Taking my parents shopping downtown. You weren't using it anyway, smiley face. I read that message 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I couldn't believe the audacity packed into 2 short sentences and a smiley face. My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. Vanessa had taken my car. Not asked. Not called. Taken. And somehow the part that hurt the most wasn't even the car itself. It was the assumption underneath it. The assumption that my things were automatically available to her whenever she wanted them. The assumption that my life no longer required consideration because I was old. I slowly sat down at the kitchen island and stared at the family photo hanging near the dining room. My son Brian stood beside Vanessa with his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera during last Thanksgiving dinner. I remembered how proud I felt that night. Brian had struggled after college. Dead-end jobs. Credit card debt. One failed engagement before Vanessa came along. When he married her. 3 years ago, I truly believe she made him happy. At first she acted sweet. Helpful. Respectful. She brought me scented candles from Bath & Body Works. Asked about my late husband. Complimented my cooking. But little by little things changed. Small things at first. Vanessa started opening my refrigerator without asking whenever they visited. Then she began inviting her parents to my home for dinner without checking with me beforehand. One time she used my Costco membership card and spent nearly $400 on party supplies for her friend's baby shower. When I gently mentioned it later, she laughed and said, "Well, we're family." Family. That word had become her master key to every boundary I owned. Another text came through. Picture this time. Vanessa's mother Denise sat in my passenger seat wearing oversized sunglasses while holding a Starbucks cup and grinning at the camera. Vanessa added the caption, "Girls' Day with Mom in our luxury ride." Our luxury ride. My chest tightened. I clicked the image larger. Denise's muddy shoes rested directly on my cream leather dashboard. I actually gasped out loud. "Oh, absolutely not," I whispered to myself. I immediately called Vanessa. The phone rang 4 times before she answered with loud music blasting in the background. "Hey, Eleanor," she said casually, dragging out my name like we were girlfriends instead of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. "Where is my car?" I asked quietly. There was a pause before she laughed. Actually laughed. "Relax. We just drove to the outlet mall in Asheville. We'll be back tonight." I closed my eyes. Asheville was almost 2 hours away. "You took my vehicle out of state without asking me?" "Eleanor, come on. You weren't using it." There it was again. That sentence. Like my ownership no longer mattered because I was 67 years old and happened to be home alone on a Sunday morning. In the background, I heard Denise's voice. "Tell her this thing drives smoother than Harold's Cadillac." Then another burst of laughter. My face burned hot with humiliation. Not anger yet. Humiliation. Because they weren't treating me like a person. They were treating me like furniture. Something old that existed quietly in the corner, while younger people enjoyed the expensive things around it. "I need the car back by tonight," I said firmly. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "We already made plans for dinner downtown. Brian said it was fine." Brian said it was fine. Not me. The owner. I swallowed hard. Brian doesn't own that vehicle. Another silence. Short. Sharp. Then Vanessa's tone changed ever so slightly. Colder. You know, sometimes I think you care more about that SUV than about family. That sentence hit me harder than it should have. Because deep down I knew exactly what she was doing. Twisting guilt into obedience. Making me feel selfish for wanting basic respect. It was a trick I had seen people use my entire life. My younger sister used it on our mother before borrowing money she never repaid. My late husband's brother used it before trying to pressure us into selling family land. People always wrapped entitlement in the language of love. I looked around my beautiful kitchen, my home, my furniture, my bills. Everything in this house existed because I worked for 43 years as a surgical receptionist while raising Brian after my husband died from a stroke. I skipped vacations, drove used cars for years, wore the same winter coat for nearly a decade. And now a 34-year-old woman with acrylic nails and a shopping addiction wanted to make me feel guilty for expecting permission before someone borrowed my $78,000 vehicle. "I'll see you tonight," I said calmly before hanging up. Then I sat there in silence. No church. No coffee. Just the sound of my refrigerator humming softly, while something inside me slowly began to shift. Because for the first time I realized this situation was no longer about a car. It was about access. Access to my kindness. Access to my money. Access to my home. And the most dangerous thing about entitled people is this. Once they get comfortable disrespecting you, they stop seeing you as a person entirely. They only see what you can provide. Outside my kitchen window, the driveway sat empty under the morning sun. But strangely enough, that empty driveway was finally making something crystal clear to me. By the time Monday arrived, things in this family were going to change forever. The rest of that Sunday moved slowly, but my mind would not settle down. I tried reading. I tried watching television. I even attempted to finish the crossword puzzle sitting on my breakfast table. But every few minutes my eyes drifted toward the front window like I was waiting for strangers to return something they had stolen. Around noon I heard my phone buzz again. Another Facebook notification. Vanessa had posted more pictures. This time they were at a steakhouse downtown. Denise sat across from Harold in a booth, both smiling wide while my Lincoln was visible through the restaurant window behind them. Vanessa captioned it, "Spoiling mom and dad today because family deserves the best." I stared at the photo so long my screen dimmed. Family deserves the best. Funny how people love using that word whenever they are spending someone else's money or enjoying someone else's property. I clicked through the comments underneath the post. "Beautiful ride. You girls look amazing. Living the dream." Then came the comment that made my stomach twist. Denise wrote, "Vanessa finally convinced Brian to upgrade the family vehicle." Upgrade the family vehicle. I nearly laughed out loud sitting there alone in my kitchen because suddenly everything became painfully obvious. These people had rewritten reality in their own heads. Somewhere along the line, my possessions had quietly become community property in their minds. And maybe the worst part was realizing I helped create that situation myself. After my husband died 14 years ago, I threw myself into taking care of Brian. He was all I had left. I paid for his college when scholarships did not cover enough. I co-signed his first apartment lease after graduation. When he lost his sales job during the pandemic, I quietly covered his truck payments for almost 8 months without telling anyone. I always told myself that helping family was what good mothers did. But there is a dangerous line between helping your children and teaching them they never have to stand on their own feet. Looking back now, I could see exactly when Vanessa noticed that weakness in me. She studied people carefully. Not in an intelligent way exactly, but in a survival way. She always knew who would say yes, who felt guilty easily, who avoided conflict. During their first Christmas as a married couple, she admired a crystal serving tray that belonged to my grandmother. She picked it up and smiled sweetly. "This is gorgeous." 2 weeks later, she casually mentioned she needed a serving tray for a dinner party she was hosting. Before I even realized what happened, I heard myself saying, "Well, you can borrow mine if you want." That tray never came back. 6 months later, I saw it sitting permanently on her dining room table during a birthday dinner. I remember standing there staring at it while Vanessa laughed with her friends like nothing had happened. Brian noticed me looking and quietly whispered, "Mom, it is just a tray. Just a tray. Just a Costco card. Just a parking spot in my garage. Just a car. Everything was always just something when it belonged to me. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard tires crunch across the driveway outside. I walked to the front window slowly. My Lincoln finally pulled in, covered in road dust from 200 miles of highway driving. Vanessa climbed out first wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying shopping bags from designer outlets. Denise stepped out behind her holding 2 more bags while Harold stretched dramatically and laughed about his back hurting from all that luxury seating. None of them looked remotely embarrassed. Vanessa walked to my front door carrying iced coffees like she was doing me some huge favor. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. "Hey Eleanor," she said brightly, handing me a sweating plastic cup. "We brought you a caramel latte." I did not take it. My eyes moved past her toward the SUV. Fast food wrappers littered the back seat floor. There was dried mud splashed along the side panels. My jaw tightened. "You drove nearly 200 miles today." Vanessa shrugged. "It is an SUV. That is what it is for." Harold laughed behind her. "Thing practically drives itself." Then Denise leaned closer to Vanessa and whispered, loudly enough for me to hear, "I told you this ride's smoother than the Lexus." My house suddenly felt crowded with disrespect. Vanessa brushed past me into the kitchen without being invited. Denise followed. Harold stayed outside admiring the vehicle like he was inspecting something he planned to purchase. I remained standing near the front door watching these people move through my home with complete ownership in their posture. Vanessa opened my refrigerator and placed leftovers inside. "We saved you half a ribeye," she announced proudly. "The place was expensive too. Brian said you would not mind covering dinner since we used your rewards card." I froze. Slowly, very slowly, I turned toward her. "My what?" Vanessa blinked casually. "Your rewards card. The visa ending in 6284. It was in the center console." For a moment I genuinely could not speak. She had taken my car, driven across state lines, used my credit card, allowed her parents to treat my belongings like entertainment props. And somehow she still stood in my kitchen acting generous for bringing me leftovers. "You charged dinner to my account without permission?" I asked quietly. Vanessa rolled her eyes slightly, already irritated by my tone. "Eleanor, you are acting like we robbed a bank. It was one dinner." Denise sat at my kitchen island sipping sweet tea like this conversation had nothing to do with her. "Young people share everything nowadays," she added casually. "Families are different now." Different now. That phrase almost fascinated me. People use modern language to excuse bad manners the same way they use family language to excuse selfishness. Vanessa finally noticed I was not responding the way I normally did. Usually I would sigh, clean up the mess quietly, then convince myself keeping peace mattered more than confrontation. But this time something inside me remained still. Cold. Observant. "Where is Brian?" I asked. "Golfing with coworkers," Vanessa replied while checking her phone. "He said he would stop by later." Of course he would. Brian always appeared after the damage was done. Never during the disrespect itself. Never during the uncomfortable moments requiring courage. He preferred arriving later to smooth things over with tired phrases like, "Let us not make this a big deal." Vanessa walked toward the hallway carrying her shopping bags. "Oh, and by the way," she called casually over her shoulder, "my parents might borrow the Lincoln next weekend too if their Cadillac stays in the shop." I stared at her in disbelief. Borrow. She still called it borrowing. Like consent had ever entered the equation. Like I had no voice in the matter whatsoever. Denise smiled awkwardly, finally sensing tension. "Vanessa just gets comfortable around family," she said softly. Comfortable. That word sat in my chest like a stone. Because comfortable people stop asking permission. Comfortable people stop saying thank you. Comfortable people eventually stop seeing boundaries altogether. And standing there in my own kitchen, watching another woman casually schedule future plans for my vehicle without consulting me once, I realized something that chilled me more than anger ever could. Vanessa was not testing my patience anymore. She already believed she had one. Brian arrived just after 7 that evening carrying a 6-pack of imported beer, and wearing the same distracted expression he always had whenever tension existed between his wife and me. He kissed Vanessa on the cheek first before even acknowledging me standing at the kitchen sink. That small detail should not have bothered me, but it did. Because years ago, before marriage and before excuses and before this strange distance settled into our relationship, Brian used to walk into my house and ask how I was doing before anything else. Now he entered like a guest trying to survive an awkward dinner party. "Hey Mom," he said casually. "Everything okay?" Vanessa answered for me before I could speak. "Your mother is upset about the car." Brian sighed instantly. Not confused. Not surprised. Just tired, like he had already decided I was being difficult. "Mom, seriously?" he said while placing the beer into my refrigerator. It was one day. I stared at him in disbelief. She drove nearly 200 miles without permission and charged dinner to my credit card. Brian shrugged lightly. "Vanessa paid for gas." The way he said it made me realize something deeply painful. He truly believed that reimbursing gasoline somehow balanced the disrespect. Like this was a simple accounting issue instead of a matter of boundaries and decency. Vanessa folded her arms dramatically beside him. "I already told you we are family." I looked directly at my son. "Would you walk into your boss's office and take his car keys because you felt like borrowing his SUV for the weekend?" Brian laughed once under his breath. "That is not the same thing." "Why not?" I asked quietly. He opened his mouth then stopped, because he did not actually have an answer. He only had emotion. Loyalty to his wife. Discomfort with conflict. Fear of being forced to admit I had a point. Harold wandered into the kitchen carrying a glass of iced tea like he lived there. "That Lincoln has some serious horsepower," he announced proudly. "You ever think about upgrading the sound system?" I slowly turned toward him. "No, Harold." I had not. He completely missed my tone. "You should. Vanessa says Brian might talk you into letting them buy it off you eventually." My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. Sometimes anger becomes so sharp it suddenly turns calm. Crystal clear. "Vanessa says many things," I replied. Denise quickly jumped in, sensing tension again. "We all just love spending time together, Eleanor." There it was. Another emotional disguise. People who overstep boundaries often hide behind cheerful language, because cheerful people are harder to confront directly. If Vanessa had screamed at me or openly insulted me, this situation would have been simpler. But instead she smiled while crossing lines 1 inch at a time. She wrapped entitlement in friendliness. That made other people question whether I was overreacting. Brian grabbed a beer and leaned against the counter. "Mom, you have to stop treating everything like an attack." I laughed softly at that. Not because it was funny, because hearing your own child dismiss your feelings eventually becomes surreal. "Interesting," I said calmly. "Tell me something, Brian. If I walked into your home tomorrow, took your truck keys without asking, used your credit card for dinner, and then told you not to be dramatic, how would you react?" Brian rubbed the back of his neck immediately. "That is different." Again, different. Conveniently different every single time the disrespect flowed in one direction only. Vanessa stepped closer to him and crossed her arms. "Honestly, Eleanor, sometimes it feels like you do not want us to feel welcome here." I looked around my kitchen slowly. The granite countertops I paid for. The custom cabinets I selected with my late husband before cancer took him too early. The dining table where I hosted every Thanksgiving dinner for the last 23 years. Welcome. I had spent years making these people comfortable. I cooked holiday meals while Vanessa arrived late carrying grocery store cookies she pretended to bake herself. I hosted birthdays, paid restaurant tabs, bought thoughtful Christmas gifts. I even gave Brian and Vanessa $15,000 toward their down payment when they purchased their townhouse. And somehow the woman who benefited from all of that now stood in my kitchen accusing me of making her feel unwelcome because I objected to unauthorized use of my own vehicle. "You know what I think?" I said quietly. The room became still. "I think everyone here has become very comfortable confusing generosity with obligation." Brian exhaled sharply. "Mom, come on."
No, y interrupta calmly.
"You come on, Brian. Because this situation did not appear overnight." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh my God." I ignored her completely and kept my eyes on my son. The first time she used my Costco membership without asking, I stayed quiet. The first time she invited guests to my home without checking with me, I stayed quiet. The first time she borrowed items and never returned them, I stayed quiet. Brian looked embarrassed now. Not guilty. Embarrassed. Like he wanted the conversation to end before accountability became unavoidable. Why are you making such a huge issue out of this? He asked. Because the issue is not the car, I answered softly. The issue is respect. Silence settled over the kitchen. Even Harold stopped chewing ice. Vanessa laughed awkwardly and shook her head. You are acting like I committed a crime. I looked directly at her. You took something expensive that did not belong to you without permission. What would you call that? Her face tightened immediately. There it was. The first crack. The first moment all evening where she finally realized I was not going to smooth this over politely. Brian stepped between us emotionally before anything else could happen. Mom, enough. Vanessa said she was sorry. I turned slowly toward him. No, she did not. Brian blinked. The kitchen became quiet again because everyone suddenly realized I was telling the truth. Vanessa had explained herself, defended herself, justified herself. But she had never once apologized. Not a single genuine apology had left her mouth all day. Vanessa scoffed loudly.
Fine. Sorry.
The word landed flat and empty on the counter between us. Denise immediately smiled with relief. There. See? Problem solved. But I kept looking at Vanessa carefully. No, I said quietly. Not solved. For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered across her face. Tiny. Fast. But visible. Because entitled people expect resistance occasionally. What they do not expect is consequences. Brian checked his watch dramatically. Can we please not ruin Sunday dinner over this? I almost smiled hearing that phrase. Ruin Sunday dinner. As if the discomfort in the room had been created by the person addressing the disrespect rather than the people causing it. Vanessa moved toward the hallway again, carrying her designer shopping bags upstairs like she already belonged there permanently. Halfway up the staircase, she casually called back down. By the way, Brian and I might need to leave one of our cars here next month while our garage gets renovated. I stared at the staircase after she disappeared from view. Then slowly, very slowly, I looked at my son. Did you already agree to that plan without asking me to? Brian suddenly became very interested in opening his beer. That night, after everyone finally left, I did something I had not done in years. I walked through my house room by room in complete silence, not cleaning, not organizing, not distracting myself with busy work the way I usually did whenever emotions became uncomfortable. Instead, I simply looked. Really looked. The throw blanket Vanessa once spilled red wine on and never replaced. The hallway table where she casually dropped her shopping bags every visit like my home was a hotel lobby. The garage shelf where Brian still stored old golf clubs and camping equipment from college because, according to him, Mom has plenty of space. Every corner of my home suddenly felt like evidence. Evidence of how gradually people can consume your boundaries while convincing you they are loving you at the same time. I barely slept Sunday night. Around 2 a.m, I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of chamomile tea staring into darkness while rain tapped softly against the windows. I kept replaying Vanessa's words in my mind. We are family. You were not using it anyway. You are making this a huge issue. The strange thing about disrespect is that it rarely begins loudly. It begins with tiny tests, tiny assumptions, tiny moments where someone waits to see whether you will defend yourself or quietly absorb discomfort to keep the peace. And once people learn you will absorb discomfort, they stop feeling guilty about creating it. Monday morning arrived gray and humid. I woke up exhausted but unusually calm. Not emotional. Calm. That difference mattered. Emotional people react. Calm people plan. I dressed carefully that morning in cream slacks and a navy sweater even though I had nowhere special to go. My late husband always said that when life becomes chaotic, maintaining dignity is its own form of strength. At exactly 8:30 my phone rang. Brian. I let it ring twice before answering. Morning, Mom, he said cautiously. His voice carried that careful tone people use when they know something is unresolved, but hope enough time has passed to soften it. Good morning. Listen, he began, about yesterday. Then he stopped. I waited. Silence stretched between us because apparently even now he could not bring himself to simply say, Vanessa was wrong. Instead he sighed. Vanessa feels like you embarrassed her in front of her parents. I nearly laughed into the phone. Interesting, I replied quietly. And how do you think I felt? Another silence. Mom. She just wants everyone to get along. There it was again. The language of peace used to excuse the behavior of the person causing the problem. I walked slowly toward the garage while holding the phone against my ear. My Lincoln sat parked exactly where it belonged, freshly washed from overnight rain, looking elegant and untouched from a distance. But as I got closer, I noticed fresh scratches near the rear bumper. Tiny. Careless. Probably from shopping carts or rushed parking. My jaw tightened. Brian kept talking. Vanessa thinks maybe tensions are high because you have been alone too much lately. I stopped walking. That sentence landed harder than anything else so far. Alone too much lately. Not because it was cruel on the surface. Because it revealed how they truly saw me now. Elderly. Lonely. Emotionally fragile. The kind of older woman whose judgment could be dismissed whenever inconvenient. Did Vanessa tell you to say that? I asked softly. Brian hesitated for half a second too long. She is worried about you.
No, I replied calmly.
She is worried about losing access. The line went quiet. I opened the SUV door and immediately smelled stale French fries and sugary coffee syrup, lingering in the leather interior. My fingers brushed across the steering wheel. Sticky residue. In the back seat sat a crumpled receipt from the outlet mall. $486 spent at designer stores in one afternoon. None of it with their own money, I suspected. Brian exhaled heavily through the phone. Mom. Why are you acting like Vanessa is some kind of villain? I stared at the mess inside my vehicle and spoke carefully. Because respectful people do not repeatedly take from others while calling themselves family. Brian sounded irritated now. You always do this. You hold on to things. That sentence surprised me enough that I almost smiled. Hold on to things. Coming from the son who still used my garage as free storage at 38 years old. I think, I said slowly, that somewhere along the way you both started confusing my patience for permission. He became defensive immediately. Nobody is using you. I looked around my garage at the shelves filled with Brian's forgotten boxes, old sports equipment, unused furniture from their townhouse renovation, even a mini refrigerator Vanessa asked to keep, temporarily, nearly 11 months ago. Really? I asked softly. He did not answer. Instead he changed the subject entirely. Anyway, Vanessa's parents might come by this weekend again. Of course they might. My house had apparently become a community center without my knowledge. For what? I asked. We were thinking maybe a cookout since your backyard is bigger than ours. We were thinking. Another plan already made involving my property before speaking to me first. I closed my eyes briefly. Brian, I said quietly, when exactly were you planning to ask me? He became annoyed immediately. Why does everything need formal permission? We are family. There was that word again. Family. The universal coupon people used to justify entitlement. I finally said the thing that had been sitting in my chest all night. Your father worked himself into exhaustion paying for this home before he died. Brian became quiet instantly. I worked 43 years helping maintain it afterward. Every bill in this house has my name attached to it. Every inch of this property exists because of sacrifices you never even saw. So yes, Brian, I expect permission before people volunteer my home, my money, or my belongings. For the first time in the conversation, he sounded uncomfortable instead of irritated.
Mom, no, I interrupta gently.
I think I made a mistake raising you to believe comfort is the same thing as ownership. Silence again. Heavy this time. Then Brian finally muttered something that told me exactly how deeply Vanessa's thinking had infected him. You know, most parents are happy to help their kids. I leaned against the side of my SUV slowly. Helping your children is one thing, I said calmly. Allowing them to disrespect you is another. He said nothing. Because deep down even Brian knew the truth. The problem was not the vehicle, or the credit card, or the cookout plans. The real problem was that my son had slowly become a guest in my life who treated me like staff. After we hung up, I stood alone in the garage for several minutes listening to the faint ticking sound of the SUV engine cooling from yesterday's trip. Then my eyes drifted toward the glove compartment. Something inside me suddenly felt unsettled. Quietly unsettled. I opened it and began sorting through the papers inside. Registration. Insurance card. Owner's manual. Napkins. Old sunglasses. Then I froze. Tucked between my insurance documents sat a folded piece of paper with Vanessa's handwriting across the top. And the moment I opened it, my entire understanding of the situation changed. My hands actually trembled a little as I unfolded the paper inside the glove compartment. Not because I was frightened, because deep down, before I even read the words, I already sensed I was about to discover something ugly. The paper was a printed insurance form. At the very top sat my home address in bold letters. Underneath it, another line had been highlighted in yellow marker. Authorized secondary driver. And next to that line was Vanessa's full legal name. I stared at it for several seconds trying to process what I was looking at. Then my eyes moved lower. There was another name listed beneath hers. Harold Carter. My pulse slowed into something cold and deliberate. This was not casual borrowing anymore. This was planning. I leaned against the SUV door and carefully read the entire document twice. Someone had started paperwork to add additional drivers connected to my vehicle using my address and policy information. Not completed paperwork. Draft paperwork. But still. My information. My property. My address. Used without my knowledge. Suddenly every moment from the past few months rearranged itself in my memory like puzzle pieces finally locking together. Vanessa asking random questions about my insurance company while pretending to make conversation. Harold complimenting the navigator's towing capacity during Easter dinner. Denise joking that I should just let the younger generation handle the driving now. None of it had been random. They had been slowly testing how much access they could gain. Folded the paper carefully and carried it inside the house. My kitchen suddenly felt different that morning. Less like a home and more like the scene of a quiet betrayal I had failed to notice until now. I sat down at the island and opened my laptop. Then I did something Vanessa would never expect from me. I stopped reacting emotionally and started gathering information. Within 20 minutes, I had logged into my insurance account online. There were no completed changes yet, but there had absolutely been recent attempts to access policy details connected to the vehicle. My stomach tightened when I saw the timestamp. Saturday afternoon. The same weekend Vanessa took the SUV. While I was sitting peacefully at home believing my daughter-in-law simply lacked manners, she had apparently been discussing my vehicle like some kind of shared family asset behind my back. I picked up my phone and called the insurance company directly. A young man named Trevor answered with cheerful customer service energy that instantly contrasted with the heaviness sitting in my chest. Good morning. Thank you for calling Carolina Mutual. How may I assist you today? I need to confirm something regarding unauthorized access attempts on my vehicle policy, I said calmly. There was a brief pause while he pulled up my account. I do see an inquiry submitted over the weekend regarding additional driver estimates, he explained. No changes were finalized. Who submitted the inquiry? Another pause. Keyboard clicking. It appears someone calling from your listed household requested information. Household. I almost laughed again at how casually systems assume shared access when families are involved. I live alone, I replied quietly. Trevor's tone changed immediately. Professional. Alert. Would you like me to place additional security verification on your account, ma'am? Yes, I answered instantly. And make sure no modifications are permitted without speaking directly to me. Absolutely. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long moment. Then I looked around my kitchen again. The polished countertops. The framed family photos. The expensive espresso machine Brian bought me 3 Christmases ago after I helped cover his tax debt that year. Suddenly everything felt layered with memories of imbalance. I started remembering all the moments where I gave without question while others quietly learned to expect it. When Brian and Vanessa bought their townhouse, their mortgage approval barely went through because of credit card balances. I paid $15,000 toward the down payment without hesitation because I wanted my son to feel stable. 6 months later, Vanessa complained at dinner that the neighborhood was kind of basic. I remember feeling embarrassed for her attitude even back then, but I said nothing. Another memory surfaced. Last summer during a family barbecue, Vanessa casually referred to my lake cabin as our family vacation property, while speaking to her coworkers. Not Eleanor's cabin. Not Brian's mother's cabin. Our family property. At the time, I convinced myself she was only speaking warmly. Now I realize she had been revealing her mindset all along. Ownership through proximity. Entitlement disguised as closeness. My phone buzzed suddenly with another text from Vanessa. Hey Eleanor. Forgot to mention Dad accidentally scraped the garage bin backing out yesterday, but it is super tiny LOL. I stared at the message blankly. Not even an apology. Just LOL. Like property damage was some funny little family accident. A second text followed immediately after. Also Brian said maybe we can take the SUV to Charleston next month for the beach trip since it has more room, smiley face. I set my phone face down on the counter very carefully because in that exact moment something inside me shifted permanently. Until now, part of me still believed this situation could be solved through conversation. Through honesty. Through explaining feelings. But entitlement that deep does not respond to explanations because entitled people already believe they are morally correct. In Vanessa's mind, she was not taking advantage of me. She genuinely believed access to my life should automatically belong to her because she married my son. And Brian had allowed that thinking to grow unchecked for years because confronting her would require discomfort. Walked upstairs slowly toward my bedroom closet, where I kept important documents in a fireproof safe. My late husband Robert always believed paperwork mattered. Emotion fades, he used to say. Paperwork does not. I could practically hear his voice while I unlocked the safe. Inside sat property records, vehicle titles, banking information, insurance documents, and copies of every major financial decision I had made over the last 2 decades. Everything organized neatly in labeled folders because Robert taught me long ago that independence requires preparation. I pulled out the vehicle title first.
Sole ownership.
My name only. Then I checked the extended warranty paperwork. Again only me. Registration. Same thing. Good. Very good. I sat on the edge of my bed reviewing documents while sunlight spilled across the carpet through half-open blinds. Downstairs, my grandfather clock chimed 11 times through the quiet house. For the first time all weekend, I did not feel hurt anymore. Hurt requires disappointment. What I felt now was clarity. Clean clarity. The kind that arrives when denial finally dies. Around noon my phone rang again. Vanessa. I answered calmly. Hey Eleanor. She said brightly, sounding completely relaxed. Quick question. Do you know where the spare key for the Lincoln is? Brian thought maybe you had another copy somewhere. I closed my eyes slowly. There it was. Another test. Another attempt to increase access one tiny step at a time. Why? I asked. Just in case we ever need to move it while helping you out around the house, she replied casually. Helping me out. Such generous language wrapped around such selfish intentions. I looked down at the title paperwork resting in my lap. Then I smiled for the first time all day. Not because anything was funny. Because suddenly I understood something Vanessa still did not. She believed kindness made me weak. She believed age made me slow. She believed silence meant surrender. And by Monday morning she still had absolutely no idea who she was really dealing with. By Tuesday morning, I had stopped seeing Vanessa as careless. Careless people make mistakes once or twice. Vanessa operated with strategy. Every smile, every casual assumption, every little family comment had been part of a larger pattern designed to normalize access to my life. And what disturbed me most was realizing Brian no longer recognized the difference between love and entitlement either. I spent most of Tuesday reorganizing paperwork at my dining room table while soft jazz played through the kitchen speakers. Not because I needed the music. Because silence had started feeling too sharp inside that house. Every few minutes I found myself staring toward the driveway through the front windows, watching sunlight reflect off the Lincoln's polished hood. My vehicle suddenly looked less like transportation, and more like a boundary marker everyone around me felt entitled to cross. Around noon my phone buzzed with another family group message. Vanessa had started 1 month ago called Weekend Crew. Even though I never liked group chats to begin with. Usually it contained dinner plans or blurry restaurant photos. This time the message read, Thinking cookout at Eleanor's this Saturday. Dad wants to smoke ribs again. Underneath it, Brian responded with a thumbs up emoji. Harold added, I will bring beer. Nobody asked me anything. Not one person. They simply built plans around my home the same way people reserve picnic tables at public parks. I stared at the screen for nearly 30 seconds before typing slowly. I was not aware I agreed to host anything this weekend. The group chat went quiet immediately. Then 3 little typing bubbles appeared from Vanessa before disappearing again. Finally she responded. Oh wow. Okay. Just those 2 words. Short. Cold. Designed to make me sound unreasonable without directly saying it. Brian called less than 60 seconds later. Mom, what was that about? I leaned back in my chair slowly. What was what about? The group message. Vanessa is upset now. Of course she was. People become very emotional the moment free access disappears. Brian, I said calmly, why does your wife continue making plans involving my property before speaking to me? He exhaled heavily into the phone. Because she assumes family is welcome. Family is invited. I corrected quietly. There is a difference. He sounded exhausted already. You are making everything transactional lately. Transactional. Interesting word coming from the man whose wife had literally attempted to involve herself in my vehicle insurance paperwork. No, irraplia. I am finally noticing how one-sided things have become. Brian lowered his voice. Vanessa thinks you hate her. That caught me off guard for a moment. Not because it was true. Because it revealed how Vanessa interpreted boundaries as personal attacks. I do not hate your wife, I answered honestly. But I no longer trust her judgment. Silence. Then Brian asked the question I think he had been avoiding for years. What exactly do you want from us? I looked around my dining room slowly. Family portraits lined the walls beside antique candle holders Robert and I bought during our 10th anniversary trip to Savannah decades ago. I remembered Brian as a little boy running through this same room in socks, while I chased him with pancakes on Saturday mornings. Back then he would hug me so tightly I could barely breathe. Somewhere along the way, adulthood turned gratitude into expectation. Respect, I said softly. I want respect. Brian laughed once under his breath, frustrated. You keep saying that, but nobody is trying to disrespect you. My eyes drifted toward the insurance paperwork beside me. Intentions do not erase behavior. He did not answer immediately. Then came the sentence that finally pushed something inside me over the edge completely. Mom, you know Vanessa's parents did not have the same financial stability growing up that we had. I blinked slowly. We had. The irony nearly took my breath away. There was no we. Robert and I built stability through decades of sacrifice. Brian inherited comfort from watching us work ourselves into exhaustion. So now I am responsible for compensating other adults because they want nicer things? I asked quietly. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you implied. His voice sharpened slightly. Why are you acting so defensive about money all of a sudden? I almost smiled hearing that question. Because people rarely notice generosity until it stops flowing toward them. Brian, I said carefully, do you know how many times I helped you financially over the years? He groaned softly. Please do not do this. No, I continued calmly. I think maybe we should do this. Because perhaps I created part of this problem myself. He stayed quiet. When your transmission failed, who paid for repairs? Mom. When your mortgage approval nearly collapsed, who stepped in? That was years ago. When Vanessa lost her marketing job during the pandemic, who quietly covered groceries for 3 months so you two could stay afloat? Brian's breathing changed slightly. Not anger this time. Shame. I never held those things over your head, I continued softly. But somewhere along the way, kindness stopped feeling like generosity to you. It started feeling normal. The silence afterward stretched long enough that I could hear birds chirping outside my dining room window. Finally Brian spoke again, quieter this time. You are acting like Vanessa is manipulating us. I looked down at the folded insurance draft sitting beside my elbow. Is she not? He immediately became defensive again. That paperwork thing was probably just confusion. Confusion. Such a comfortable word for people unwilling to confront reality. Brian, I said carefully, your wife attempted to connect herself and her father to my vehicle policy without discussing it with me. Nothing was finalized. Because I caught it. He had no response to that. Instead, he changed direction again, exactly like he always did when conversations became too honest. Look, Vanessa just likes feeling included. Included. Another soft word disguising hard behavior. I stood up slowly and carried my coffee mug toward the kitchen sink. Outside, clouds gathered over the backyard while distant thunder rolled across the sky. There is a difference between inclusion and possession, I said quietly. And I think your wife stopped understanding that a long time ago. Brian's tone cooled noticeably. So what now? Finally, the first practical question anyone had asked me all week. What now? I rinsed my coffee cup carefully under warm water before answering. Now, I said calmly, things are going to start changing. He became wary immediately. What does that mean? I dried my hands slowly with a kitchen towel while staring through the window at my driveway. It means I am done pretending uncomfortable behavior is acceptable simply because we share DNA. Mom? No, Brian. Listen carefully. I spent years trying to be easygoing because I thought keeping peace made me a good mother. But peace built on disrespect is not peace. It is surrender. The line went quiet again. Then softly, almost cautiously, Brian asked, Are you threatening us? I actually laughed at that. No, irraplia. I am finally protecting myself. And deep down, I think that was the moment my son realized something important. For the first time in his entire adult life, his mother was no longer asking for permission to have boundaries. Wednesday morning felt strangely peaceful for the first time in days. Not because the situation improved, because clarity removes confusion, and confusion is exhausting. I woke before sunrise, made fresh coffee, and sat on my back patio wrapped in a light cream cardigan while the North Carolina air carried the smell of wet grass after overnight rain. Birds chirped softly in the oak trees lining the fence behind my property, and for a few precious minutes, life almost felt normal again. Then my phone buzzed. Vanessa had tagged me in another Facebook post. I opened the app slowly and immediately felt my jaw tighten. There sat a smiling photo of Vanessa standing beside my Lincoln in my own driveway. Her caption read, Borrowing Mom's luxury beast again this weekend. Road trip energy. Hundreds of little reactions floated underneath the photo already. Friends laughing. Heart emojis. Comments calling her spoiled. But one comment made my stomach drop. Denise wrote, One day that beauty will belong to you and Brian anyway. I stared at the screen in complete silence. Not because the comment shocked me anymore. Because suddenly I realized these people were not joking. Somewhere inside their minds, they had already started mentally redistributing my possessions before I was even gone. It was not only disrespect anymore. It was anticipation. I closed the app and placed my phone face down beside my coffee cup. Then I sat there listening to the wind move through the trees while a very uncomfortable realization settled into my chest. People do not become entitled overnight. Entitlement grows when nobody interrupts it. And I had spent years interrupting my own instincts instead of interrupting bad behavior. Around 9:30 that morning, I drove downtown to meet my attorney, Richard Hensley. Richard had handled Robert's estate after his death and later helped me update my own paperwork several years ago. He was in his early 70s now, sharp as ever, with silver hair and the calm patience of someone who spent decades watching families destroy themselves over money and property. His office smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of place where reality becomes difficult to avoid. Eleanor, he said warmly as I sat across from his desk, what brings you in? I folded my hands carefully in my lap. I think my family has become a little too comfortable with my assets. Richard leaned back slightly and nodded once like he had heard versions of that sentence 1,000 times before. That usually means this conversation is overdue, he replied gently. For the next 40 minutes I explained everything. The vehicle, the insurance paperwork, the assumptions, the increasing access to my home and finances. Richard listened quietly without interrupting once. When I finished, he removed his glasses slowly and folded them on the desk. You know, he said carefully, most people wait until boundaries have completely collapsed before seeking legal advice. I am not trying to punish anyone, I replied immediately. I know, he said. That is actually why I am taking this seriously. His words stayed with me. Because manipulative people often depend on kind individuals hesitating to protect themselves. Richard opened my file and reviewed several documents. Your assets are straightforward, he explained. House, vehicle, retirement accounts, cabin property. Everything remains solely in your name. That is good. Can someone attempt access without permission? I asked quietly. He gave me a long look over the top of his glasses. People attempt many things when they believe emotional proximity gives them ownership. Emotional proximity. Such an elegant way to describe entitlement disguised as family closeness. Richard spent the next half hour helping me tighten protections I should have established years ago. Password updates. Access limitations. Clarified directives regarding property use. Everything calm. Professional. Legal. No drama.
No emotional speeches.
Just boundaries finally becoming official instead of implied. Before I left, Richard asked one final question. Do you believe your son understands what his wife is doing? I paused near the office door. I think Brian understands more than he admits, I answered honestly. But understanding something and confronting it are not always the same thing. Richard nodded slowly. That is usually true in marriages. Driving home afterward, I felt lighter than I had all week. Not vindictive. Not angry. Simply prepared. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you stand legally, financially, and emotionally. And for the first time in years, I no longer felt dependent on anyone's approval to protect my peace. But of course, peace never lasts long once entitled people sense change. I had barely pulled into my driveway when another vehicle turned the corner behind me. Vanessa. She parked beside the garage and stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses, white sneakers, and that overly cheerful expression she used whenever she wanted something. Hey Eleanor, she called brightly while walking toward me. Funny running into you. Nothing about this was accidental. Hello, Vanessa. She glanced toward the Lincoln immediately. Brian said you were acting weird about the SUV lately. Acting weird. Not concerned. Not uncomfortable. Weird. Because entitled people always describe boundaries like personality flaws. I have been reconsidering some things, I replied calmly. Vanessa laughed lightly and waved her hand dismissively. Well, I told Brian you are probably just stressed. She followed me toward the front porch without being invited. Actually, I came by because Dad wanted to know if he could borrow the Lincoln Saturday morning before the cookout. I stopped walking. Slowly, I turned toward her. There is no cookout. Vanessa blinked behind her sunglasses. What? I never agreed to host anything. Her smile faded slightly. Brian said it would be fine. Brian does not own this house. The air between us changed instantly. Tiny shift, but unmistakable. Vanessa crossed her arms. Okay, honestly, you have been acting really cold lately. I unlocked my front door calmly. No, I have been acting clear. She followed me inside anyway. I do not understand why everything suddenly feels so formal. Formal. Another interesting word. Apparently asking permission before using someone's home, money, or vehicle now counted as formal. I set my purse on the kitchen counter carefully before answering. Because informal arrangements only work when mutual respect exists. Vanessa scoffed softly. You make me sound like some gold digger. I looked directly at her for several long seconds. Not angry, not emotional, just observant. And for the first time since this entire situation began, Vanessa looked slightly uncomfortable under my silence. You know, she said carefully, my parents think you do not like them. I almost smiled hearing that. Because manipulative people often recruit outsiders emotionally whenever direct access starts disappearing. Your parents are not the issue, I replied quietly. Then what is? She asked. Finally, the real question. I stepped closer to the kitchen island and rested my fingertips lightly against the marble surface Robert and I once picked out together decades ago. The issue, I said softly, is that somewhere along the way, you stopped behaving like a guest in my life and started behaving like an heir. Vanessa's entire expression changed. Vanessa stared at me across the kitchen island like she genuinely could not decide whether I had insulted her or simply confused her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound in the room came from the refrigerator humming softly behind us and the ticking of the antique wall clock near the dining room entrance. Then she laughed. Not naturally. The kind of laugh people use when they want to regain control of a conversation slipping away from them. Wow, she said slowly. That is actually really hurtful. I leaned lightly against the marble countertop. Truth usually is. Her expression hardened immediately. Tiny shift. Tiny crack in the cheerful mask she wore so carefully around people. I have never acted entitled to your things, she replied sharply. I almost smiled hearing that sentence because manipulative people often reveal themselves through the exact accusations they rush to deny. You took my vehicle without permission, I said calmly. You used my credit card without asking. You attempted access to my insurance policy. And you continue volunteering my house for events I never approved. Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. You are blowing everything completely out of proportion. Am I? I asked quietly. She opened her mouth then stopped. For the first time since this entire situation began, she no longer sounded confident. Irritated, yes. Defensive, absolutely. But not confident. Because deep down she knew I finally saw her clearly. Honestly, she muttered. I think you just do not like sharing control. That sentence sat between us for several seconds. Then I nodded slowly. You are correct. Vanessa blinked, clearly expecting resistance instead of agreement. This is my home, I continued calmly. My property. My finances. My vehicle. So no, I do not enjoy losing control over things I spent 40 years building. Her jaw tightened slightly. You make everything sound so transactional. Again with that word. Transactional. Funny how people only dislike boundaries when those boundaries inconvenience them. Vanessa walked toward the refrigerator and opened it without asking, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water like she owned the kitchen. I watched her carefully. The casualness no longer annoyed me now that I understood it properly. It fascinated me. Entitlement always reveals itself through comfort. The comfort to touch, to assume, to take, to rearrange someone else's life without hesitation. My parents think you are judging us, she said while twisting the bottle cap open. Your parents barely know me, I replied. Your parents know what you tell them. She took a sip of water and shrugged. Well, they think you hold money over people. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Not because it was funny, because the irony nearly choked me. Interesting, I said. Considering I am apparently the only person in this family expected to provide resources without conditions. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. Nobody asked you to help Brian all those years. That sentence landed differently than the others. Colder. Meaner. Because she was trying to rewrite generosity into weakness. I looked at her carefully. No, irraplia quietly. He did not ask. I offered. Because I loved my son. Then stop acting resentful about it. I became very still after she said that. Not emotional. Still. There is a point in every difficult relationship where confusion disappears completely. A point where the other person accidentally reveals exactly who they are. And standing there in my kitchen watching my daughter-in-law drink sparkling water from my refrigerator, while criticizing years of sacrifices she directly benefited from, I realized something important. Vanessa genuinely believed appreciation was optional. Do you know what your problem is? She asked suddenly. You expect everyone to treat you like some fragile queen because you are older. I stared at her in silence. She continued before I could answer. You think every little thing is disrespectful if people are not constantly asking permission for every tiny detail. I noticed then that she kept saying tiny. Teeny detail. Tiny issue. Tiny misunderstanding. Minimizing behavior is another trick manipulative people love, because if the offense becomes small enough, your reaction starts looking unreasonable instead. Permission matters, I said calmly. Especially when something does not belong to you. Vanessa shook her head dramatically. God, this is exhausting. Then she laughed again. You know what? I think you are lonely. There it was. The real weapon. Not anger. Not insults. Condescension. She wanted me positioned as emotional and unstable because older women become easier to dismiss once people label them lonely or bitter. You spend too much time alone in this giant house thinking about things, she continued. That is why you obsess over every little issue. I folded my hands loosely in front of me. And yet somehow all these little issues seem to benefit you. Her face tightened instantly. Wow. No, I said softly. Wow is exactly how I felt discovering insurance paperwork with your name connected to my vehicle. For the first time since arriving, Vanessa looked genuinely nervous. Tiny flicker. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. That was not finalized, she snapped quickly. Because I caught it. Silence crashed into the kitchen. Heavy silence. The kind that exposes truth whether people admit it or not. Vanessa set the water bottle down harder than necessary. Brian said you would overreact if we asked. I blinked slowly. Excuse me. She crossed her arms again. We were only exploring options because Dad's car keeps having problems, and you barely drive the SUV anyway. There it was. Finally. Not borrowing anymore. Not temporary use. Rationalization. They had already started planning long-term access to my vehicle behind my back because, in their minds, my needs mattered less than theirs. So instead of asking me directly, I said quietly, you decided to work around me. Vanessa scoffed. You are making us sound criminal.
No, I replied calmly.
Just dishonest. Her face flushed red immediately. You know what? Maybe Brian was right. About what? I asked. About you becoming difficult lately. I almost smiled hearing that. Because boundaries always feel like cruelty to people who benefited from your lack of them. Vanessa grabbed her purse aggressively off the counter. Honestly, I do not even know why I keep trying with you. I watched her carefully while she marched toward the front door. Trying. Such a fascinating word for someone who had spent years taking without permission. Before she reached the doorway, I spoke one final sentence. Calm. Soft. Completely controlled. Do not ask for the SUV this weekend. Vanessa froze with her hand on the door handle. Slowly she turned around. Seriously. Very seriously. Brian is going to be furious. I tilted my head slightly. Then perhaps Brian should purchase a vehicle large enough for his own family. The silence that followed felt electric. Vanessa stared at me like she no longer recognized the woman standing in front of her. And truthfully, maybe she did not. Because the version of me she built her comfort around was disappearing rapidly. Finally, she shook her head in disgust. You know what? Keep your stupid car. Then she walked out the front door and slammed it hard enough to rattle the hallway picture frames. I stood alone in the quiet house afterward, listening to the echo fade away. Then slowly, very slowly, I walked toward the front window. Outside, Vanessa climbed into her sedan and immediately grabbed her phone with furious movements. Probably calling Brian. Probably preparing herself to become the victim somehow before he heard my side. But as I watched her drive away, I realized something that made me unexpectedly calm. For the first time all week, Vanessa was angry because she had lost access. And people only panic when they realize the door they took for granted is finally starting to close. By Thursday afternoon, the atmosphere around my family had shifted completely. Nobody said it directly, but I could feel it in every text message, every delayed reply, every carefully chosen word. The easy access they once had to my time, my property, and my patience was beginning to disappear, and suddenly everyone seemed uncomfortable. Funny how quickly people notice boundaries after years of benefiting from their absence. I spent most of Thursday quietly reclaiming my home. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Calmly. Deliberately. I cleared old storage boxes from the garage that belonged to Brian. Golf clubs. Camping chairs. Plastic bins filled with college textbooks he had not opened in 15 years. I stacked everything neatly near the side entrance and sent him one simple message. Please pick up your belongings by Sunday.
No accusation. No lecture.
Just clarity. His response came 20 minutes later. Seriously. I looked at the text for a moment before setting my phone down without answering, because I finally understood something important. People who are accustomed to unlimited access interpret normal boundaries as hostility. Around 5 o'clock, while I was reorganizing kitchen cabinets, I heard tires pull into the driveway again. I looked through the front window and immediately saw Harold's Cadillac parked beside the garage. Of course, I opened the front door before anyone could knock. Harold stepped out first carrying a smug smile and a bag of takeout food. Denise followed behind him looking nervous already. Vanessa climbed out of the passenger side with crossed arms and oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Evening, Harold said casually, like nothing in the world felt unusual. We brought barbecue. I stayed standing in the doorway. That was not necessary. Vanessa rolled her eyes instantly. Can we not do this tonight? Interesting. She arrived at my home uninvited and somehow I was the one doing this. Harold lifted the takeout bag awkwardly. Brian said everybody should calm down and have dinner together. Brian, always trying to skip accountability by forcing fake peace before problems are actually addressed. I did not invite anyone over, I said calmly. Vanessa scoffed loudly. You used to like when family visited. Used to. Another emotional trick. As though my discomfort appeared randomly instead of directly following repeated disrespect. Denise stepped forward carefully. Eleanor, we all think maybe this has gotten bigger than it needed to. I almost smiled hearing that because people benefiting from bad behavior always believe consequences are the overreaction, never the behavior itself. Has it? I asked softly. Harold sighed dramatically. Look, nobody was trying to steal your car. There it was. The first time anyone had used the word steal out loud. Fascinating how defensive people accidentally reveal their own understanding of the situation. Then why was insurance paperwork being discussed without me? I asked calmly. Harold immediately looked toward Vanessa. Tiny glance. Tiny betrayal. But I caught it. Vanessa stepped in quickly. Oh my God, are we still talking about that? Yes, I replied. Because you still have not explained it honestly. She laughed sharply. There is nothing to explain. I leaned lightly against the doorway. Then explain why your father's name appeared beside mine on vehicle paperwork. Silence. Denise's face changed first. Confusion. Genuine confusion. She slowly looked toward Harold. What paperwork? Harold shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa answered too quickly. It was not finalized. Denise frowned now. Vanessa. Suddenly the entire dynamic changed. For the first time, cracks appeared inside their own family instead of only mine. Harold cleared his throat awkwardly. It was just a conversation with an insurance office. Without my knowledge, I added calmly. Vanessa threw her hands into the air dramatically. Because we knew you would freak out exactly like this. There it was again. My reaction became the problem instead of their behavior. Classic. Denise looked genuinely embarrassed now. Harold, why would you do that? He became defensive immediately. I was just checking options because your car keeps breaking down. My car. Not Eleanor's vehicle. Not borrowing temporarily. Their thinking had already crossed fully into ownership territory. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. Honestly, this is ridiculous. You act like we are criminals because we wanted practical solutions. I looked directly at her. Practical solutions begin with honest conversations. Harold suddenly laughed awkwardly like he wanted to smooth things over. Nobody died, Eleanor. That sentence chilled me more than anger would have. Because it revealed how casually these people viewed violating boundaries as long as nobody screamed or called the police.
No, iraplia sufli.
But respect did. The silence afterward felt heavy enough to bend the air itself. Brian arrived 15 minutes later looking exhausted before he even entered the house. He walked into tension already in progress and immediately rubbed both hands across his face. Can everybody please calm down? He muttered. Vanessa instantly moved beside him like positioning herself emotionally before a battle. Your mother is accusing us of trying to steal her car again. Brian looked toward me with frustration instead of curiosity.
Mom. No. I interrupta calmly.
Do not reduce this into exaggeration because it makes you uncomfortable. He sighed heavily. You are turning paperwork into a conspiracy. I stared at my son carefully. And you are turning dishonesty into inconvenience because facing it honestly would require courage. His face tightened immediately. Harold stepped in again. Look, maybe everybody should apologize and move on. Fascinating. The people causing the disrespect always want immediate peace once consequences appear. But real peace requires accountability first. I am not interested in fake harmony, I said quietly. Vanessa laughed bitterly beside Brian. You know what your problem is? You think everybody wants what you have. I became very still after she said that, because deep down we both knew that was true. Not necessarily because they were evil people, but because entitlement grows naturally around comfort and convenience.
No, irraplia calmly.
I think you became too comfortable believing my life existed for your benefit. Brian finally snapped slightly. Mom, enough already. I turned toward him slowly. No, Brian. Enough was when your wife took my vehicle without permission. Enough was when my credit card got used behind my back. Enough was when my property became community discussion material without my involvement. He opened his mouth to argue again, but this time Denise interrupted softly. She does have a point. The entire room froze. Vanessa looked stunned. Harold looked irritated. Brian looked trapped. Denise lowered her eyes slightly before continuing. We probably got too comfortable. There it was. The first honest sentence anyone besides me had spoken all week. Vanessa immediately became angry. Mom! Denise looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Well, we did assume things sometimes. Vanessa stared at her mother in disbelief like betrayal had just occurred. And suddenly I understood something very important. Vanessa had built this entire system on shared assumptions. Shared entitlement. Shared emotional pressure. But the moment even one person acknowledged the truth out loud, the entire illusion started cracking apart. Brian looked exhausted beyond words now. Can we just stop doing this tonight? He asked quietly. I looked around my own living room, at the people standing there tense and uncomfortable, because one older woman finally decided her boundaries mattered. Then I answered the only honest way possible. That depends, I said calmly. Are any of you finally ready to hear the word no?